Is that Melanie?
The interactive horror game masterpiece Until Dawn is coming with a thrilling horror film of the same name. A group of young people triggers the death loop switch. Each resurrection unlocks new monsters, who will escape this death game and survive until dawn. A girl crawled through a dark, narrow cave. It seemed that something was chasing her from behind. Sure enough, the next second, the girl was grabbed by a monster at her ankle. She desperately crawled out of the cave, but she still couldn't escape her tragic fate.
No, I can't die again.
Can't do it.
Please, not again. I can't. No, please.
The main character, Clover, called a few friends for help to search for her sister Melanie, who had been missing for a year. Melanie went on an adventure to a haunted house with her friends. However, she simply vanished into thin air. Accompanying Clover were her ex-boyfriend Max, which Megan, Nina, and her boyfriend Abel. Before Melanie disappeared, she had sent Clover a video. The background of the video was a convenience store, so the group went to that convenience store to look for clues, which Megan suggested that they perform a ritual first. Maybe her psychic abilities could help them find Melanie. Nina was somewhat skeptical and mocked her. Megan had only found her cheating father. Clover interrupted their argument. With Clover's encouragement, they finally held hands and formed a circle, but they not only failed to find any clues, but they almost got run over by a large truck. Since the ritual fails, Clover went into the convenience store. To look for clues, she showed the store owner a photo of her sister, and asked if he had seen her. The owner confidently said that she was missing. This left Clover stunned. It turned out the owner had seen many families looking for missing persons. The legend of the haunted Blackwood Mountain not far away had been passed down for many years, but there were always people who came to explore for the thrill. The convenience store was the last place to stock up. Before heading in, that was why families often came to inquire about news. Some even went in personally to search, only to end up missing themselves. But Clover wasn't concerned about any of that. She took her friends, followed the owner's directions, and drove into the woods. Before long, a torrential downpour suddenly began. The rain was so heavy that they could hardly see through the windshield. The others started to back out, but Clover insisted on pressing deeper. As they argued, the car suddenly broke through the storm. The sight before them shocked everyone. The rain continued to pour all around them, yet, centered around the house in front of them, the area within 100 meters was dry. The scene was extremely eerie. It was as if someone deliberately trapped them with the rain. Strangely, none of their phones had any signal. It seemed there was no other option at this point. To seek help, they could only enter the house. Inside, it was eerily quiet, with not a single person in sight. The date on the calendar was still stuck. More than 20 years ago. It was clearly a place that had been abandoned for a long time, but the wall clock with an hourglass gave off an indescribable strangeness. The group quickly began to search the house. Clover stayed outside, pondering while watching the rain. Abel instinctively took out his phone to look and film. He entered a small room and found a bulletin board, covered in papers that seemed odd. He casually tore down a news article from the wall. Behind it, he discovered a missing person notice. He tore down everything on the wall, and found that the entire wall was densely covered with missing person notices. Upon closer inspection, one of them was a notice for Clover's sister, Melanie. Bored, Nina wrote her name in the logbook. Meanwhile, Megan hoped to find some water to drink. Suddenly, Clover seemed to see a figure in the distance. It looked like her missing sister. She immediately rushed into the rain, but quickly got lost in the downpour. Concerned, her ex-boyfriend Max hurriedly followed after her. In the nick of time, Max pulled Clover back. One more step, and Clover would have plunged into the rain. At this point, Nina also noticed something unusual. She flipped through the log and found that it contained Melanie's name and others. The names were written over and over again. The further back she went, the more the handwriting became sloppy and distorted. It was as if the writer was slowly forgetting how to hold a pen. Then Abel voiced his own doubts. These missing person notices lack detailed information about the missing individuals and their family contact numbers. They are essentially just useless pieces of paper. However, the handwriting in the log at least proved that Melanie had indeed been here. Just as everyone was discussing what to do next, Nina suddenly noticed that the hourglass on the wall had been turned over at some point, yet none of them had touched it. Before anyone could process this, Megan heard a noise outside. She ran outside to find that their car was missing. The group rushed out in a panic and saw the car parked in the rain. It had started by itself, looking like it intended to crash into them. Everyone quickly retreated back into the house. The situation was too strange. There must be someone else here, and they didn't come in peace. After some discussion, they decided to leave 2 people watching outside, while the others continued searching the house for a phone, the group searched the house, and discovered a staircase leading to the basement. Walking down the stairs, they found that the basement was even larger than the first floor. To their surprise, there were even windows on the walls. The strange layout sent chills down their spines. Soon, they found a phone. Unfortunately, the phone had long been disconnected. Fortunately, they found a working radio. Megan called into the radio, but there was no response. Abel and Nina, who were watching upstairs, suddenly heard a noise from deep within the room. Abel told Nina to keep an eye outside, while he bravely went to investigate. Before long, Nina heard another strange sound. She called out to Abel several times but got no answer. Causing her to panic, she hurriedly felt her way toward the source of the sound. In the dark, it was too dark in the room, and Nina couldn't see anything. She groped around and turned on the light. As the light came on, a scream echoed throughout the villa. The three in the basement heard it too. Max cautiously peeked out. The sight before him made his heart race. Max quickly pulled his head back and dragged his companions into a corner. Before long, a masked figure walked in. Max seized the opportunity and swung a chair at the back of the creature's head. He grabbed a wooden stick and swung it, but the creature struck him down in one hit. Megan, hiding in the cupboard, couldn't help but let out a small gasp. The sound alerted the monster, and it immediately walked toward the cupboard. It seemed unaware of Clover hiding behind the door. Clover slowly felt around and found a kitchen knife nearby. But Nina wasn't so lucky. The monster suddenly grabbed her and slammed her head against the floor. Clover couldn't help but rush over to help, but the monster seemed to feel no pain. Clover had to turn and run, frantically fleeing into the woods. Meanwhile, the last grain of sand in the hourglass on the wall had just finished falling. The dial began to turn with a clicking sound, and the hourglass flipped over. An eerie scene unfolded. The people who had just died opened their eyes one by one. They still retained their previous memories. They could even vividly remember the pain of dying. The group exchanged glances, still in shock. They suddenly noticed that their missing person notices had appeared on the wall. Nina stammered that when she revived, she had written her name on the log for the second time, and the names of the missing persons had been written dozens of times. At this point, everyone heard the sound of knocking on the door. Gathering their courage, they returned to the living room and found the door opening and closing repeatedly. Abel tried to lock it, but it was useless. They had to quickly prop something against it. Suddenly, Megan clutched her arm and cried out in pain. Before anyone could react, her arm snapped with a crack. Then, her whole body began to crack and pop. In the next second, the room was plunged into darkness. The group followed the sound and found Megan floating in midair.
Who's there? This town was right to be damned. We're all sinners here.
Make it stop. I just want to die. Please, please just let me die. Where's my mom? Mommy?
Megan seemed to be expressing the obsession of the missing persons. In the next moment, she let out a piercing scream. After saying, "Don't let him in," she suddenly stopped breathing. Everyone was startled by this. At this point, a sudden knocking sound came from outside the door, but looking through the window, there wasn't a single figure in sight. Then, a cry for help came from outside. Clover recognized the voice as Melanie's. Melanie shouted at her sister for help. Clover immediately prepared to open the door, but Abel quickly stopped her. Given the uncertainty outside, they absolutely couldn't open the door easily. But the next second, Melanie suddenly let out a scream. It sounded like she was in some kind of danger. Max quickly opened the door, but the scream abruptly stopped. There was no one outside to call for help. In the distance, a creepy house had appeared out of nowhere. Before they could take a closer look, Clover, who was at the front, suddenly seemed to be yanked by something, and flew back several meters. The others were also pushed back by a strange force, tumbling into the house. When they tried to push the door again, it was jammed and wouldn't budge. They could only watch helplessly, as Clover was dragged into the creepy house. After a long while, the door finally unlocked. Max, frantic with worry, wanted to rush out to save her. Abel quickly stopped him, saying that Clover was in grave danger. The priority was to leave and find help quickly. Nina stood still, hesitating. Seeing this, Max was both anxious and angry. He slammed the door and decided to go save Clover alone. After being pulled into the house, Clover nervously looked around. The room was packed with all these weird-looking busts, giving off the totally creepy vibe. An old woman sat in front of the television. Though she looked like a living person, given the surroundings, she seemed even more terrifying. Clover turned to run, but no matter how she pulled, the door wouldn't budge. When she turned back again, the old woman had stood up, grinning wide with a strange laugh.
You either survive the night, or become a part of it.
Clover was so scared her legs went weak, and she desperately begged for mercy, but the old woman lunged at her and pinned her to the ground. She ripped off an oxygen mask and pressed it onto Clover's face. Before long, Clover's eyes turned completely black, and she displayed a strange smile. The old woman seemed to be drained of life, turning into a pile of dust. Max arrived in front of the creepy house. The door slowly opened by itself. Max knew that danger lurked inside, but he stepped in anyway to save Clover. Abel and Nina took the opportunity to run to the car. They planned to sneak away while the monster was distracted, but they hadn't gone far when a gigantic monster suddenly appeared ahead. The two were terrified and hurriedly reversed back to their original position. Just as the car came to a stop, Nina was about to open the door. Abel's blood splattered onto her. The masked monster approached the car window. On the other side, Max searched every corner of the creepy house. Aside from the eerie mask statues, there was no sign of Clover. Max went to a room on the second floor and discovered a rocking chair gently swaying, but it was clearly empty. Max stopped the rocking chair, but when he turned back, again, the chair started rocking once more, and a clown doll had appeared on it.
Whoa, fuck. Clover?
Possessed Clover walked out of the house in a daze. The monster drove the car wildly towards Clover. As everyone died one by one, the hourglass on the wall began to turn again. Everyone returned to the save point once more. This time, everyone became smarter, realizing that running was useless. Instead, they used furniture to barricade the doors and windows securely. They hid in the bathroom, waiting for dawn. Clover remembered that the old woman had said they could only truly escape if they survived the night. Abel, unable to stand his thirst, wanted to get some water. He discovered that the faucet was actually running with water. Megan found it strange that water suddenly appeared, but seeing everyone drinking, she took a cup and had a sip. Then, the group began to ponder what the old woman's words really meant. Megan speculated that if they couldn't escape, they would eventually all turn into monsters. Having only gone through the cycle twice, she felt her body growing weaker. Suddenly, Abel began to cough violently. Looking down, he saw his palms covered in blood. He hurriedly wiped off the blood, fearing the others would notice, but before long Abel's coughing intensified, and he couldn't stop. The others were about to ask him what was wrong, when Abel's body suddenly exploded, shocking everyone. Nina was splattered with chunks of flesh, and screamed as she ran to clean herself off. Megan suddenly realized that something was wrong with the water, but just as she shouted, Nina's body exploded as well. The damaged faucet sprayed a torrent of water. The group frantically opened the bathroom door and desperately tried to escape, but the danger couldn't be shaken off. Before long, Megan also started to cough violently. She quickly exploded into chunks just like Abel. Clover urgently urged Max to kill himself first, before taking his own life. This way, they could be resurrected. But Max began to hesitate. The sand in the hourglass was running out quickly. As long as they could survive until dawn, they could escape. Clover firmly disagreed. She couldn't just stand by and watch her companions die. But before she could act, Max exploded as well. Right when Clover was lying on the ground, waiting for the loop to reset again, a person whistling leisurely walked out. It turned out to be the convenience store owner. The owner said that staying alive wasn't so easy. It was impossible to escape disaster by doing nothing. Just as Clover was about to ask, she exploded into a mess of flesh too. Then the hourglass finally ran out completely. It seemed like they were always just a little bit short. The group revived once more. Although they couldn't uncover the entire truth, they finally had a lead. They found documents in the house and studied them carefully. Max found information from a newspaper. It turned out that 20 years ago, there was a major accident due to mining here. A mining disaster caused a ground collapse, burying the nearby tourist town. It resulted in the deaths of over 1,000 people. At this point, everyone understood. No wonder the basement was so large and had windows, because this was originally a floor of the building above. They gathered their courage and opened a large door. Inside was a cold, damp tunnel.
I think we need the Bible as a weapon.
Yeah, dude, not against a masked maniac, though.
Okay, but we're not just up against that psycho. Every single night something new's trying to kill us.
Yeah, but why?
Then Clover discovered that the convenience store owner, Manny, was a psychologist brought in for the rescue. Back then, they found a box of videotapes in his drawer. The contents revealed Manny's true intentions. It turned out that Manny had been studying the effects of despair and fear on the human body. The mining disaster rescue provided him with the perfect opportunity. He secretly locked up the survivors he rescued. These people, living in fear and despair and having eaten human flesh, gradually transformed into Wendigos. Everyone finally figured it out. At this point, Manny's voice suddenly came through the radio. He said that Clover's sister Melanie was right in the woods. If Clover wanted to see her sister, she should hurry over. Upon hearing this, Clover immediately wanted to rush over to save her, but Abel stopped the others. He said they couldn't risk everyone's safety for Clover alone, and urged everyone to escape quickly. With the lessons learned from before, Nina immediately grabbed a weapon and stabbed Abel. She told Max and Megan to go after Clover. She added that if they didn't return, Before dawn, she would take care of Abel herself, to prevent him from refusing to commit suicide, to revive in order to escape. On the other side, Clover was frantically running through the woods, when she suddenly stepped into a bear trap. She immediately screamed in pain. Unexpectedly, the bear trap had a chain attached. In the next second, Clover was pulled into a hole by something. Her screams echoed through the woods. Meanwhile, Max and Megan discovered the site of a collapsed area. They didn't dare to linger and hurried on to search for Clover. Suddenly, they thought they heard Clover's screams, just as they were about to hide and check. But during their escape, Megan, in a moment of panic, tripped over something. Just as she was about to get up, she heard a crack. Megan looked down and realized she was on the glass roof of a sunroom. Cracks were rapidly spreading. Max didn't dare to move recklessly, and carefully tried to help Megan up. But the Wendigo behind them gave them no chance at all. The glass shattered completely, and Megan fell into the room. Dragged into the darkness by the Wendigo, Max had to temporarily abandon the rescue of Megan. At this point, Clover managed to crawl out with sheer determination. Not long after, Max arrived and helped Clover open the bear trap. But at this point, a hideous Wendigo emerged from the darkness. Max immediately grabbed the bear trap and swung it. Taking advantage of the Wendigo's surprise, he quickly helped the incapacitated Clover to escape. The two found a small house to hide in. It turned out that the Wendigo they had just seen, though fearsome, Clover recognized it at a glance as her sister Melanie. Although Clover knew deep down that her sister was no longer the same, she still couldn't accept this cruel reality. It wasn't until Max told her that Megan was dead that Clover finally fully came to her senses.
You think we get a chance to do it all again?
I'm not. It just means more somehow, when you know you only have one shot.
Suddenly, the two heard the Wendigo's low growl again. Clover hurriedly picked up a shard of glass, and urged Max to kill himself. Max immediately did as told, and drank the dirty water dripping from the roof. He cursed the Wendigo before exploding into a spray of blood. After an unknown amount of time, Clover woke up. As she reached to brush her hair, a strand fell out with a gentle tug. Abel also felt something was wrong with his back. He took off his shirt and saw that bone spurs had broken through his skin. Clover rushed to check the logbook. She discovered that Nina's name had been written 13 times. This meant they had gone through the cycle 13 times. But strangely, everyone had no memory of the later cycles at all. Clover boldly speculated, each resurrection not only harmed their bodies, but also affected their minds, and the log had recorded the names of the previous missing persons, no more than 13 times. With more bizarre houses appearing outside the building, she understood that if they didn't make it until dawn this time, everyone's bodies would completely collapse and turn into Wendigos. At this point, Clover realized that Megan was missing. Abel said that not everyone could endure 13 cycles. Megan was weak, and she might have already succumbed, turning into a Wendigo first. Suddenly, Abel remembered something, and quickly pulled out his phone to browse his albums. It contained many videos he had taken, which were records of forgotten cycles. They had encountered all sorts of monsters. In the last cycle, Megan, who had miraculously survived, finally captured the mastermind Manny on camera. Megan knew this was an opportunity, so she left the phone behind and chased after him alone. At this point, several monsters were slowly approaching the house. The remaining people had to push open the door and enter the tunnel, but they hadn't gone far when the tunnel was blocked by collapsed earth. Fortunately, there were many buried houses nearby. They opened a window and crawled in to continue moving forward, but soon, the Wendigo discovered them. The group panicked and began to flee. They finally managed to shake off the Wendigo. Just as they sighed in relief, a noise suddenly came from above. Looking up, they saw the masked monster. He kicked through the glass and jumped down. Seeing the urgency of the situation, Max immediately told Clover to find Megan. The three of them stayed behind to block the monster. The monster raised a giant hammer and swung it aggressively. Max and Abel launched a surprise attack from behind. After a series of attacks, the monster finally collapsed to the ground. They seized the giant hammer and eliminated this threat. On the other side, Clover encountered her sister Melanie once again. She wanted to try to bring Melanie's sanity back. Unfortunately, it was in vain. She had no choice but to free Melanie herself. Then Clover found Megan, who had been locked up. But there was also a Wendigo chained up in the room. It was desperately struggling to lunge at Megan. Clover quickly searched for the keys. She finally discovered a room filled with surveillance screens. It was clear that Manny usually monitored them from here. At this point, Manny entered the room with a cup of coffee and locked the door. With a strange smile on his face, he said Clover was one of the few who could find this place. Then Manny began to explain the secrets of the experiment. It turned out that the fears and despair of the trapped individuals not only determined what kind of Wendigo they would become, but also provided energy for this endless cycle of the game. But Clover had no interest in listening to his nonsense. She just wanted to rescue her companions as quickly as possible. Looking at the dripping water above her, she suddenly thought of a way. Taking advantage of the moment when Manny turned around, Clover quietly moved the cup on the table to catch a drop of dirty water. As Manny began to feel a bit dry-mouthed, he picked up the cup and took a sip. Sure enough, it wasn't long before he exploded into a mass of blood. Clover picked up the key from the pool of blood and rushed to the room where Megan was held. She opened the door and rescued Megan. Just before the Wendigo broke the chains, the two of them stumbled and found the exit, desperately climbing upward, but the Wendigo chased them too quickly, grabbing their feet. Fortunately, they didn't give up easily. When they reached out again, Max and the others, anxiously waiting below, quickly pulled them out. As the last grain of sand in the hourglass fell, the first ray of dawnlight shone in, the surrounding mist slowly dispersed. The five of them finally escaped this nightmarish place unscathed. But everything wasn't over. One day, another car drove into the jungle. The familiar whistling sound echoed once again. However, the film ends here. As a horror film adapted from the game of the same name, this film doesn't simply follow the game's content. Instead, it uses some of the game's settings to tell a completely different story. A group of teenagers is trapped in an abandoned visitor center. Each time they die, they return to the starting point. Their only goal is to survive until dawn. The seemingly cliched horror movie framework gains an additional layer of reflection on choice and fate, due to its connection to the game's core. The biggest feature of the original game is the butterfly effect. Every choice made by players influences the characters' lives and the outcome. It's even possible to achieve a perfect ending, where all characters survive. The film clearly can't replicate this multi-threaded narrative. However, it cleverly uses the loop mechanism as a core element. The main characters gradually uncover the truth through repeated deaths. Each restart feels like a forced replay of a game save. However, the simplification of the game's complexity has sparked controversy. In the game, players can influence the overall situation through detailed investigation and choices. The film focuses more on survival itself, downplaying logical reasoning and causal chains. This approach, while making the plot tighter, sacrifices the depth of the original work. Overall, Until Dawn, as a game adaptation, successfully transforms the core concept into a thrilling story that is accessible to the public. It uses the gimmick of a death loop to cover its logical flaws, and compensates for the lack of character depth with bloody scenes. Though it can't compare to the interactive charm of the game, it at least accomplishes a subversive attempt. If you enjoy my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to it.